I had just dipped the mop into fresh water when my brother's voice cut through the lunchtime chatter like a knife. "There she is," Brandon laughed loud enough for half the cafe to hear, "still a worthless janitor." Every conversation around us seemed to pause. I kept my hands on the mop handle and looked up without saying a word. Brandon stepped farther inside, grinning as though he'd just found the punchline to a joke. "I told Mom we'd run into you eventually," he said. "I just didn't expect to find you scrubbing floors." My mother, Diane, walked in behind him carrying shopping bags. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my apron and rubber gloves before a slow smirk spread across her face. "I suppose somebody has to clean up after successful people," she said. A couple near the window stopped eating. Someone at the counter quietly lowered their coffee cup. I could feel dozens of eyes drifting toward us, but I didn't stop working. Brandon shook his head dramatically. "You spent years studying hospitality management just to end up pushing a mop. That's honestly embarrassing." He laughed again. "So, how much does a worthless janitor make these days?" The silence around us grew heavier. Behind the espresso machine, one of my baristas looked toward me, waiting for some signal. I gave her the smallest shake of my head. "Keep serving. Keep smiling. Don't make a scene." Brandon mistook my silence for defeat. He had no idea that in less than 2 minutes, someone in this room was about to ask one simple question that would change everything. I wrung out the mop and finished cleaning the entrance as if my brother's words hadn't landed at all. That only seemed to irritate him more. For Brandon, silence wasn't dignity. Silence was surrender. He'd believed that my entire life. Growing up, he was the child everyone praised. Honor rolls, varsity sports, business degree. Our relatives introduced him as the future executive. I was simply the quiet one. The one who preferred working instead of talking. The one who never argued, even when people assumed the worst about me. That habit had followed me into adulthood. I'd learned long ago that correcting people rarely changed what they wanted to believe. So when Brandon decided I was nothing more than a janitor, I let him believe it. Not because I was ashamed. Because I had nothing to prove. 2 years earlier, I'd bought this struggling neighborhood cafe from an elderly couple who wanted to retire. They had spent 27 years building it, and before signing the papers, they'd asked me to promise something. Never become the kind of owner who hides in an office. I'd taken that promise seriously. Every morning I swept the sidewalk. I wiped tables. I unloaded deliveries. I washed dishes when the kitchen fell behind. And yes, I mopped the floors. My employees knew no job was beneath me, because no job was beneath any of us. Most customers assumed I was just another member of the staff. That was exactly how I wanted it. What I didn't want was my family discovering I owned the business. The moment Brandon or Mom knew, every holiday would become a request for money, advice, or favors. Keeping my ownership private protected both the cafe and my peace. Unfortunately, privacy also gave Brandon plenty of ammunition. He looked around at the dining room, then spread his arms dramatically. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "this is why you stay in school." A few uncomfortable chuckles escaped from people who clearly didn't know what else to do. Diane folded her arms. I always told her she'd regret settling for work like this. My cashier looked ready to intervene. Again, I gave the tiniest shake of my head. Company policy was simple. Customers always came first. Personal drama never did. Brandon mistook everyone's restraint for agreement. He stepped closer. "You know what's really sad? You could have had an actual career." He pointed toward my mop. "Instead, this is your future." The cafe had become so quiet, I could hear the espresso machine steaming milk across the room. Then a chair scraped against the floor. A well-dressed customer stood from a corner table, slowly looked around the cafe, and spoke in a calm, measured voice. "Excuse me. Every head turned toward him. "I need to speak with the owner." Nobody answered. Nobody moved. For a few seconds, the only sounds in the café were the hiss of the espresso machine and the quiet clink of silverware against ceramic plates. Brandon glanced around with a smug smile. "The owner's probably hiding in an office somewhere," he said. "I don't blame him. I'd hide too if I had employees this lazy." He jerked his thumb toward me. "Especially that one." I calmly set the mop inside the utility closet near the entrance before turning to one of my servers. "Table 6 needs another pot of coffee," I said quietly, "and don't keep table 3 waiting for dessert." "Yes, Rill." She caught herself before finishing my name and simply nodded. "I'll take care of it." Brandon laughed. "Look at that, even the waitresses feel sorry for you." I didn't answer. There was no point. Growing up, I'd spent years trying to defend myself. When Brandon broke something, I was blamed for distracting him. When he forgot birthdays, everyone said he was busy building his future. When I quietly helped our grandparents with groceries every weekend, no one even noticed. My mother had one explanation for everything. "Your brother has bigger responsibilities." Those words had followed me through childhood and into adulthood. When Brandon landed a corporate sales job, relatives celebrated him as though he'd become a celebrity. When I studied hospitality management and eventually entered the restaurant business, Mom simply sighed. "You always choose small dreams." If only she knew. Or maybe if she had ever cared enough to ask. Brandon walked beside me as I carried a tray of clean glasses toward the counter. "You know," he said loudly enough for nearby customers to hear, "there's still time to fix your life." I kept stacking glasses. "I'm doing just fine." He laughed. "No, you're surviving, there's a difference." Diane nodded approvingly. "Listen to your brother for once." Then Brandon turned toward a family finishing lunch. "Kids," he said with a grin, "stay in school unless you want to end up cleaning somebody else's floors." The parents looked uncomfortable. Their young daughter frowned at him. "But she's working hard," the little girl said. Brandon awkwardly chuckled. "Working hard isn't always enough." Across the café, 2 baristas exchanged uneasy looks. One quietly whispered to another, "He really doesn't know." The other shook her head. "Not yet." The well-dressed customer remained standing patiently beside his table. He glanced at Brandon only briefly before looking back across the café. Then he spoke again, this time more firmly. "I really need to speak with the owner." The room became even quieter. No one answered. "Not yet." The silence lasted only a moment before Brandon stepped forward with the confidence of someone who had never doubted he belonged in charge. "I can help," he announced, straightening his jacket. "The owner will definitely want to hear this." The well-dressed customer regarded him politely. "Oh." Brandon nodded toward me. "You've got an employee who's wasting time. I've been standing here for several minutes while she's pretending to work." I continued wiping down the counter nearest the register, saying nothing. The customer glanced at me briefly, then back to Brandon. "I see." "And honestly," Brandon continued, lowering his voice just enough that everyone could still hear, "people like her are exactly why businesses struggle. No ambition." Diane stepped beside him. "She's always settled for less," she said with a dismissive shrug. "We've tried encouraging her to do something meaningful with her life." Several customers exchanged uncomfortable looks. A businessman near the window quietly folded his newspaper. An elderly couple stopped talking altogether. The cheerful lunchtime atmosphere had disappeared. Just then our cafe manager, Marcus, emerged from the kitchen after hearing the raised voices. He approached calmly. "Good afternoon, is there a problem?" Brandon smiled as though help had finally arrived. "There certainly is." He pointed directly at me. "Your janitor has been standing around while customers are waiting." Marcus didn't even look at me. Instead, he kept his eyes on Brandon. "I'm sorry you feel that way." Brandon mistook the response for agreement. "I'd have fired her months ago." A few employees visibly tensed. One of the cooks leaned through the kitchen window. Another server quietly whispered to a coworker, "This is getting bad." The coworker shook her head. "He still has no idea." The well-dressed customer finally spoke again. "My name is Thomas Reynolds." A few nearby diners recognized the name immediately. I travel across the country reviewing independently owned cafes and restaurants. This establishment has received remarkable recommendations for its leadership. Brandon laughed. "Leadership?" He pointed at me again. "Well, don't ask the janitor." A nervous ripple moved through the dining room. Marcus's expression changed almost imperceptibly. He turned away from Brandon and looked directly at me. "Not for instructions, for permission." Every employee in the cafe noticed it. Several customers noticed it too. Brandon didn't. Marcus waited respectfully before speaking. "Ma'am," he paused. "Would you like me to handle this?" The question hung in the air like a dropped glass that hadn't yet shattered. Brandon's confident smile slowly began to fade. Brandon stared at Marcus for a long second before letting out a short laugh. "Oh, that's cute," he said. "You call all your employees ma'am now." Marcus didn't respond. His eyes remained on me. Every member of the staff did the same. I looked around the dining room, where dozens of customers had stopped eating to watch the exchange unfold. The lunch rush couldn't wait forever. I spoke calmly. "Sarah, can you check on table 8? They asked for more iced tea." "Right away," Sarah answered. "David, the soup order for table 4 is almost ready." "I've got it," David replied immediately. "Marcus, please make sure the new guests by the window aren't kept waiting." "Of course." Within seconds, the cafe came alive again. Servers moved with purpose. The kitchen resumed its rhythm. The cash register rang as another order was completed. Not a single employee questioned my instructions. Brandon's smile disappeared completely. He slowly looked from one employee to another. "Why," he muttered, "why is everyone listening to her?" Diane frowned. "There has to be some mistake." I picked up a tray left beside the counter and carried fresh drinks to a nearby table. "Here you are," I told the customers. "Thank you, Relindis," one of our regulars said warmly. "Everything looks wonderful as always." "My pleasure." As I returned toward the counter, Brandon's eyes followed me. For the first time since walking into the cafe, he wasn't laughing. He was thinking. He watched a barista quietly ask me whether we should bring out another tray of pastries. He watched Marcus wait for my answer before making a schedule adjustment. He watched a delivery driver hand paperwork directly to me for approval. One clue by itself meant nothing. Together, they painted an entirely different picture. Brandon swallowed. "Mom," Diane looked at him. "Doesn't this seem strange?" Before she could answer, Thomas Reynolds stepped forward. His calm voice carried easily across the dining room. "My name is Thomas Reynolds." Several customers immediately straightened in their seats. One woman whispered to her husband, "Isn't he the columnist from City Dining Review?" "I think it is." Thomas smiled politely. "I write about independently owned cafes across the country." He looked around the room. "I've spent the last month interviewing customers, visiting anonymously and researching businesses whose owners are known for leading from the front rather than from behind an office door." His attention settled on me. "This cafe has been recommended repeatedly." Brandon forced an awkward chuckle. "Well, you've definitely got the wrong person." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Oh." Brandon pointed toward me. "She's just the janitor." Before Thomas could answer, Marcus took one step forward. Brandon hurried to continue. The owner should know she's wasting time cleaning instead of doing something important. Thomas calmly lifted a hand. If you don't mind. His interruption was gentle, but final. I'd rather hear from the management team. Brandon fell silent. Marcus glanced at me once more. I gave him a small nod. He turned toward the dining room, his voice clear enough for every customer to hear. Ladies and gentlemen. Every conversation stopped. I'd like to introduce you to the owner of Carter Corner Café. He extended his hand toward me. Ms. Relindes Carter. The entire room froze. For one long, unforgettable moment. Nobody moved. Brandon's mouth slowly opened, but no words came out. My mother blinked twice, looking from Marcus to me, then back to Marcus again. What? She whispered. Marcus didn't repeat himself. He simply smiled. Our owner, he said again, Ms. Relindes Carter. The silence that followed felt almost unreal. The customers who had witnessed every insult turned toward Brandon at the same time. Only minutes earlier, he had proudly called me a worthless janitor. Now everyone understood exactly what had happened. He hadn't humiliated an employee. He had publicly mocked the owner. Thomas Reynolds walked toward me with an easy smile and extended his hand. So it's finally nice to meet you. I shook it. Likewise. I've been hoping to meet the person behind this cafe. Brandon frowned. This can't be right. Thomas looked at him politely. Oh, he gestured around the room. I visited this cafe 4 different times over the last month. My brother stared at him. 4 times. Thomas nodded. Every visit was anonymous. He smiled at me. And every visit I watched the owner refill coffee, clear dishes, greet regular customers by name, unload deliveries, wipe tables, and yes. He glanced toward the mop, still resting beside the utility closet. He mopped the floor. A few customers smiled. Thomas continued. Most owners try to look important. He looked around the cafe. She tries to be useful. Several people began applauding. It started with the elderly couple by the window. Then the family with the little girl. Soon nearly the entire dining room joined in. I felt my face grow warm. Not from embarrassment. From gratitude. Marcus stepped beside me. I've worked in restaurants for 18 years, he said to Thomas. I've never worked for someone who refuses to ask employees to do anything she won't do herself. Sarah laughed softly. She cleaned the grease trap herself last Friday. The kitchen staff chuckled. David added, last month she covered 3 shifts because 2 employees had sick children. Another server nodded. She knows every customer's favorite drink. One of our regulars raised his coffee cup. Mine's ready before I even sit down. The room filled with quiet laughter. Every story the staff shared made Brandon's shoulders sink a little lower. He finally looked directly at me. You own this place. I do. Since when? Just over 2 years. His forehead wrinkled. But why would you? He pointed toward the mop. Do that. I smiled. Because that's part of the job. He stared at me blankly. No. I nodded. Yes. I looked around the cafe. If my employees have to clean, I clean. If dishes pile up, I wash dishes. If customers are waiting, I serve them. And if the floor needs mopping. I glanced toward the entrance. As I mopped the floor. Thomas smiled broadly. That's exactly why this cafe kept appearing during my research. He opened his notebook. Every employee I interviewed said the same thing. He looked directly at Brandon. They don't work for an owner. They work beside one. The applause returned. This time it was louder. Brandon lowered his eyes. He swallowed. I didn't know. No, I answered calmly. You didn't. Diane finally found her voice. Relindy's. She forced an uneasy smile. You should have told us. I looked at her for several seconds. When? She hesitated. When you laughed at my first restaurant job. She said nothing. When you called hospitality a dead-end career. Silence. When you spent years telling everyone Brandon was the successful child. Her smile disappeared. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse her. I simply asked questions neither of them could answer. Thomas quietly closed his notebook. I think, he said gently, I've already found the story I came here for. Over the next hour, he interviewed me, Marcus, several employees, and a handful of regular customers. Not once did he ask about profits. Not once did he ask how many locations I planned to open. Instead, every question centered on one thing. Why do you still clean? My answer never changed. Because ownership isn't a promotion. It's a responsibility. Brandon and my mother left the cafe before the interviews finished. Neither of them said goodbye. 3 weeks later, Thomas's feature was published. It wasn't titled after me. It was titled, The Owner with the Mop. Within days, customers from neighboring towns began visiting. People weren't coming because the cafe had the fanciest furniture. They came because they wanted to support a business where the owner believed every job mattered. Business grew steadily. I hired more staff. We expanded our kitchen. A year later, we opened a second location. Marcus became the general manager of the first cafe. Sarah became assistant manager. Every promotion came from people who had earned trust through hard work, not titles. A few months after the article was published, Brandon asked if we could have coffee together. I agreed. He looked different, quieter. I owe you an apology, he said. I spent years measuring success by job titles. He looked down at his cup. I never noticed your character. I accepted his apology. But I also made something clear. I forgive you. He looked relieved. That doesn't mean things go back to the way they were. He nodded slowly. I understand. A week later, my mother called. For the first time in years, she didn't offer advice. She didn't compare me to Brandon. She simply asked how I was doing. Some relationships heal slowly. Others never become what they once were. I stopped chasing the version of my family I wished existed. Instead, I invested my time in the family I had built inside my cafe. People who respected one another. People who never believed any honest job made someone worthless. Even now, every morning before opening, I still sweep the sidewalk. I still wipe tables. And whenever the entrance needs mopping, I pick up the same mop without hesitation. Because my brother was wrong about one thing. Being a janitor was never something to be ashamed of. Treating people like they were beneath you was. As I picked up the mop again the next morning, I smiled, because the only title that had ever mattered wasn't owner. It was becoming someone no insult could ever diminish.